Hello, my name is John Deben. I'm one of the genealogy specialists at the National Archives and Records Administration. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about how to research military service. I'm focusing specifically in this lecture on volunteer service in the U.S. military. There are different types of service that were documented in different ways. Volunteer service, of course, encompassed the state regiments and local militia that were raised for specific wars or national emergencies. The regiments were recruited, the men fought and served, and then at the end of the wars, the regiments were disbanded and the men went home, and that was the extent of their service. Because of that, the War Department never had any official documents per se to record the history of their service. So in the 1890s, they decided to create these compiled military service records, and these are the basic records that we have to document volunteer service in the U.S. military. They started to do it originally for Union veterans to document their service in terms of verifying their service for pension benefits. And then afterwards, they went back and they documented volunteer soldiers for other wars as well, going back to the Revolutionary War. So the records that we have, there were extracted information from original records that were kept at the time that these wars took place, including muster rolls, payrolls, unit returns, hospital records, prison records, and things of that nature. And they went through these records and they had employed probably thousands of War Department clerks to extract specific information about individual soldiers from these records. They copied the information down on individual cards, and those cards became that soldier's compiled service record. So the compiled records that we now have are arranged by war, then by state, then by unit, and then alphabetically by the soldier's name. And we have compiled service records then going back from the Revolutionary War in 1775 all the way up to the early 20th century with the Philippine insurrection, which ended in 1902. So we have for the Revolutionary War, we have compiled service records for the post-revolutionary period from 1784 to 1811, which included a lot of militias that were raised to protect the frontiers against Indian warfare. The War of 1812, other antebellum Indian wars from the First Seminole War to the Third Seminole War, which ended in 1858. The Mexican War, the Civil War, Spanish-American War, and the Philippine insurrection. All of those records, the compiled service records, are available in textual form with a few exceptions. For the Revolutionary War, for the post-revolutionary period, and for selected records from the Civil War are available on microfilm. For the Civil War specifically, what we have available on film for compiled service records are the Confederate records. And on the Union side, we have selected records for the border states, western states and territories, and southern states that supplied Union regiments during the war itself. But your major northern states, Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, Minnesota, and so on, those records are still only available in textual form. So what basic information can you find in a compiled service record for a volunteer soldier? It will give his full name, his dates of enlistment or when he was mustered into service, and also his dates of discharge or when he was mustered out. Sometimes it'll give you his period of service, if he enlisted for a 3-year term or a 2-year or 9-month term, and so forth. You usually give his residence, not necessarily the place where he was born, but where he was residing at the time that he enlisted. Some personal information. Sometimes you'll get a description, height, weight, eye and hair color, and so forth. And then they'll also have notations regarding specific activities or events of notice that took place during his service. If he was assigned to special duty for something, if he was captured and served time in a prisoner of war camp, or if he was in a hospital wounded and things of that nature. That'll be noted on the service record cards as well. So we'll take a look at a specific example of a service record, looking at William Graham, who served in the 1st Massachusetts Regiment during the Revolutionary War. If you look at the first image from that service record, this is actually an image of the jacket that the record is contained in, and it gives you the basic information right on the jacket about the soldier, including his name, his unit, the war he served, and it will also provide the rank that he held when he went into service and the rank that he held when he was discharged from service. There are also a series of card numbers that are arranged on the front of the jacket. Generally what these numbers refer to, each number is stamped onto the back of one of the cards that are inside the jacket. So basically this was a basic record-keeping technique that was used by the War Department to make sure that the right cards were filed with the right jacket. So they don't lead necessarily to any other specific records. However, if you look at the bottom of the jacket where it says bookmark, if you see information recorded there, numbers or any other notations, those could lead you to other textual records that we might have in our holdings. So it would definitely be worthwhile to take a look at that. If we look at some of the cards inside the jacket, you'll find other more specific information about the soldier. The first card in this slide shows more specific information about the company that he served in. In this case, it shows the name of his company commander, Captain Abraham Hunt, and it also shows his regimental commander, Colonel Joseph Voge. So that's more specific information that we didn't have from the front of the jacket. Sometimes you also notice variations in the spelling of the last names. Here you'll see his last name spelled Grayham, as well as the traditional Graham, Grham. You have to remember that when these original records were recorded, that at the time, all the information was transmitted verbally. So there are going to be spelling variations, so you just need to be aware of that. The cards also show his date of enlistment, January 26, 1776. And you also notice between two of the cards, there's a change in rank. In January of 1778, he's still holding the rank of corporal, which he went into the service with. But in May of 1779, he's a private. We don't know why. The records don't indicate on the card, but something happened at some point in time that he was broken in rank from corporal to private. But as we saw on the jacket, on the outside of the jacket, he ended his service as a corporal. So whatever happened, he must have redeemed himself, and he regained his original rank. But of course, the records don't specifically indicate what might have happened. So just to summarize then, the basic information that you can find in the compiled service record, we have the soldier's name, William Graham. We learned that he served in Captain Abraham Hunt's company of Colonel Joseph Voge's 1st Massachusetts Regiment. It was also known sometimes, it's also recorded in the compiled service record as the 1st Massachusetts Battalion of Forces. He enlisted January 26, 1776 for 3 years, holding the rank of corporal, then demoted to private, but ending his service as a corporal again. And it also shows that the various pay rates that he received during his time of service. For example, when he was serving as a corporal in January 1778, he was being paid $7 1/3 per month for that service. When he was serving those few months as a private, he received $6 2/3 per month for that service. Where you can generally find the records, of course all the textual records are available here at the National Archives building. The records that are available on microfilm and also online, you can also find on Footnote, Ancestry, or Heritage Quest online. And you can also, if you can't visit the National Archives in person, you can request the records through the mail using a traditional mail-in form that's also available to download from our website, www.archives.gov. Hello, my name is John Deben. I'm a genealogy specialist at the National Archives and Records Administration. And in this lecture, we're going to be talking on how to research military service in the regular Army and Navy of the United States. Of course, the service in the regular military, this included the professional soldiers. These were the men who served during both times of war and during peacetime. The units that they served in were established regiments. They had their own history. They existed before the soldiers enlisted into service, and they continued on after the soldiers were discharged, unlike volunteer regiments who were created and discharged for specific periods of time. So to document the service in the regular Army, the War Department did keep a specific set of records called the Registers of Enlistment. What we have are available that document service in the regular Army from 1798 to 1914, just prior to the beginning of World War I. The Registers of Enlistment are available in textual form, and they're also on microfilm in National Archives publication M233. They're arranged by time period, and then by the first letter of the initial surname, and then by date of enlistment. So to use them effectively, you do need to have at least a general time frame of when a soldier enlisted to find him in the records. The basic information that an entry in the Register of Enlistment will give you includes the name of the soldier, his rank, a physical description including height, eye color, hair color, complexion, his civilian occupation, his date and place of birth, his enlistment information when he was listed and discharged, and he usually gives the place of discharge as well. And at the end of it, it usually gives a brief summary of his character as a soldier at the time that he was discharged. So it gives you a pretty good basic information about the beginning of a soldier's service and his ending of his service. As an example, we'll look at a register of enlistment for an Alfred Pride, who enlisted in 1878. Now the entries in each register covers 2 pages. So if we look through the whole entry, this is the information that we glean about Alfred Pride's service. It shows that he enlisted July 11th, 1878. He was originally born in Richmond, Virginia. He was 32 at the time that he enlisted. He identified his occupation as a soldier, so that's an indication that he was a career soldier, and he might have enlisted prior to this time. His physical description included he had black hair and he was 5 foot 8 inches tall. He was assigned to the Company F of the 24th U.S. Infantry, and this was actually his 3rd enlistment. So the fact that he identified himself as a soldier reflects that. He was discharged from service on February 10th, 1883. His expiration of service took place at Fort Elliott, Texas. He was a private at the end of his service, and his character as a soldier at the time of his discharge was listed as good. So he probably had a fairly typical service as a soldier during his time in the Army. Now, the Navy equivalent of the Register of Enlistments were the rendezvous reports. These were the weekly reports that were compiled by recruiting officers in the Navy. The records that we have available begin with the Mexican War and go to the early 1890s. There are 2 separate indexes that are available for the rendezvous reports. They're both on microfilm. The one publication is T-1089 or 1098, which includes rendezvous reports for before and directly after the Civil War, from 1846 to 61 and from 1865 to 1884. The other index specifically covers Civil War service, and it's microfilm publication T-1099, covering the years 1861 to 65. And the actual reports themselves, the weekly rendezvous reports, are available on microfilm as well in publication M-1953, Weekly Returns of Enlistments at Naval Rendezvous, from January 6, 1855 to August 8, 1891. Basic information that you can find on the rendezvous report for a typical sailor includes his name, again his date and term of enlistment, his rating, which was the naval equivalent of his rank, his previous naval service, if any, his usual place of residence, which means where he usually resided when he was on land and not at sea, his place of birth, again his civilian occupation, a personal description, and it will also include information about distinguishing marks and scars that he may have had on his person to help, again, further identify who he was. A typical example, we'll take a look at the rendezvous report for James G. Mason. If we read his entry in the rendezvous reports, we'd learn that he enlisted on June 25th, 1884 at Mare Island, California. He enlisted for 1 cruise on the Monongahela. He was 22 years of age at the time of his enlistment. His occupation was a cook. His physical description shows that he was a Negro, 5 foot 1.5 inches tall, born in East Oakland, California. He had a scar on his left leg and a tattoo of a shield, cross, and flag on his left forearm, and his rating at that time was a landsman, which means that he had no prior service at sea at the time that he enlisted in the Navy. Again, the availability of the records, in addition to the original records, what's available on microfilm, especially for the Register of Enlistments, are available on Ancestry.com. You can also find some information on Footnote and Heritage Quest, or you can request service information from the regular Army or Navy through a mail-in service with a mail-in form that are available on the National Archives website at www.archives.gov. Hello, my name is John Dibben. I'm a genealogy specialist at the National Archives and Records Administration. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about how to research military service in the U.S. military using pension records. Of course, the pension records that we have here at the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. Document service in the U.S. military between 1775 and 1916. With one major exception, we do not have Confederate pension records. Of course, the federal government did not issue pensions to Confederate veterans. The southern states did issue such pensions to those veterans, so to find them you would have to go to the state archives, depending on which southern state the Confederate veteran was living in at the time that he applied. Otherwise, there were different types of pensions that were issued by the federal government. Initially, a veteran could only receive a pension based on disability that was incurred during his time of service. But as time went on, the pension laws became more liberal, and veterans could receive pensions just for having served in the military, and also widows and their dependents could also receive pensions based on a veteran's service. And there were also many different pension acts over the years. So if a veteran or a widow or some such applicant was rejected for a pension under one act, they could reapply under a later one and hope to get a pension. Pension records are usually the most valuable records that you can use for genealogy research in terms of documenting someone's not only their military service but also family information as well, because the pensions included the name of the individual, the veteran, his dates of service, and also his periods of service, the units that he was attached with during his service in the military, his residence. It'll give you information about his medical history, especially if he applied for a pension based on a specific disability. It'll usually give his death dates, and especially if a widow or dependent filed for a pension, they had to prove their relationship to the veteran. So in these instances, you'll see a lot of family documents that might show up, including original marriage certificates or pages out of a family Bible that were sent in by these widows to verify that they were married to the deceased veteran. We're going to look at a specific example of a pension record using William Graham, who served in the Revolutionary War. The envelope that contains his pension file gives you some basic information. It shows his name, the name of his widow, Mary. It gives you the pension certificate number, and also shows the state that he served from, in this case both Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Both William and his widow Mary, they both applied for pensions during their lifetimes. William Graham applied for his pension under the Act of March 18th, 1818, and then after his death in 1824, his widow Mary applied for her own pension under the Act of July 4, 1836. So both of their pension certificates are included in the pension file. William Graham also had to provide a declaration or an affidavit for his pension to prove that he needed these type of benefits. So the information that you can find on his declaration shows that he was 62 years old at the time that he applied on April 21st, 1818. At the time that he filed for his pension, he was living in Hadley in Saratoga County, New York. His declaration shows that he enlisted in Captain Abraham's company of the 1st Massachusetts Regiment in 1777 for a period of 3 years. He indicates that he fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill, which actually occurred 2 years before that service in 1775. And he indicates that he served under Captain William Scott of the New Hampshire line. So there are two different distinct periods of service that could warrant further investigation. Over the years, he indicates that he lost his discharge papers, so to verify his service, he includes a statement from Lewis Scott, who was the son of his company commander, William Scott. And what Lewis basically does is provide a statement saying that, yes, he remembers both William Graham and his father, William Scott, sitting around the fireside in their elderly years, regaling about their military service during the Revolution. William Graham, at this time that he applied for a pension, also had to prove that he was destitute and he needed these benefits. So he provided an inventory of his property, which actually turns out to be pretty meager. He shows no real property that he owns, and his list of personal property is pretty poor. Among other things that he enlists includes 2 hogs valued at $5, 1 spade valued at 25 cents, a tea kettle valued at 75 cents, and so forth. He indicates that he was a basket maker by trade, but due to his age and illness, he's no longer able to work. His wife, who's age 68 at this time, is also unable to work. And he also says that he's supporting a daughter who is age 30, who's lame and subject to frequent fits. So all these factors together are putting a burden on his household, and so he states that he's unable to subsist without a pension or some type of private or public charity. And this is the case that he makes in order to get a pension from the federal government. After his death, Mary Graham applied for her own pension, and she again provides her own declaration, filed in 1837, and at this time she was 86 years of age. She includes a copy of the affidavit filed by William in 1820, detailing his service under both Captain Scott in the New Hampshire line, Captain Abraham Hunt in the 1st Massachusetts Regiment, and she also mentions 2 other services under Captain John Miller and Captain Timothy Remick's company, but she doesn't provide specific states or any more information about what those services are about. The pension file also includes a statement showing Mary Graham's death, which occurred about a year later after she applied for a pension. Mary died on June 10, 1838. The statement of death includes the surviving children and the legitimate heirs who were still living at that time. So it shows that she had 2 daughters, Lucinda Eggleston, who was married to Amos Eggleston, living in Saratoga County, New York, and a Nancy Clayton, who was married to Farmer Clayton, living in Fulton County, New York. So again, here you can find useful information about the family of the veteran. One other type of useful document that you can find up until the early 20th century, before these pension records were transferred to the National Archives, individuals, they were held by the VA, and individuals would still write into the VA requesting genealogy information, so that when a request like this came in, somebody at the VA would look at the file and then type up a summary of the important information within the records. So if you're lucky, you might also come across a typed summary that's also included as part of the record. So we have that in the case of William Graham. There's a 2-page summary. The first, which provides very good information about his service. The first paragraph, again, gives a summary of all his military service. A second paragraph shows specific information about his marriage to Mary. It provides her maiden name in this case, and also the date that they were married. And the third paragraph gives more specific information about the surviving children. And it mentions, as we've seen before, Lucinda and Nancy, and it also mentions a daughter, Rhoda, who we can assume is probably the lame daughter who he was supporting at the time that he applied for a pension. So again, the availability records, the majority of pension records are only available in textual form that we have, with the exception of the Revolutionary War pension files. Those are available both on microfilm and they're online through Ancestry and also Footnote. And you can also find other records on Heritage Quest. Or if you want to request a traditional search of the records, you can use a mail-in form that's also available on the National Archives website at www.archives.gov.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Crawford, and I am an archive specialist at the National Archives and Records Administration.
And I'm Catherine Voline, and I am also an archive specialist at the National Archives and Records Administration. And today we're going to be looking at immigration records.
Part of our immigration records, we have records of the U.S. Customs Service that are part of Record Group 36. They're going to cover the time period 1820 to 1890, with the exception of Philadelphia, which will start in 1800. We will also look at some examples from the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which are part of Record Group 85. They're going to range from 1891 to 1957. On the screen, you'll see a list of some of the major ports that we have relating to immigration. Within those ports, you'll see records for the Port of Philadelphia, which range from 1800 to 1952, for the Port of New York from 1820 to 1957, Baltimore for 1820 to 1957, New Orleans from 1820 to 1952, and San Francisco from 1882 to 1957. We also have some records for our border crossings here at the National Archives. So if your ancestors crossed the border from Canada into the United States, you're going to look at the Port of St. Albans. Those records will start in 1895 and go through 1954. If you have an immigrant ancestor that came from the border from Mexico, then you're going to be looking at the Mexican border crossings. Those records will start about 1903 and run to about 1955.
Now, the type of information that you can find in the immigration records is going to vary over time, but all of the immigration records, both customs and the INS records, will include the name of the ship, the name of the ship's master, the port of arrival and embarkation, and also the date of departure and the date of arrival. But some of the basic information the kind of thing that you'll be looking for when you're doing genealogy research. The early customs records are going to include the name of the individual, their age, their occupation, country of origin, and destination. Now, as I said, these vary and they're going to be different over time. And this is a really early record into Philadelphia. This is the Brigg experiment coming in 1809. And if you take a look, you see all the damage. You've got holes. You've got tape, it looks like. Record is not in good shape. These were actually stored on the docks before they were turned over to us, so they were exposed to water, other elements, vermin, rats could get at these things. So we're lucky we actually have what we do have. But this is actually mostly a cargo list. So up here this is all cargo, and the passengers are down at the bottom. So you'll see there are 14 boxes of linen, 1 chest of glass, 1 box of sealing wax. And for passengers, we have an example of Henry Vogt and his wife and 3 children. Now, the rest of the family's names are not listed. So all we know is Henry Vogt had a wife and he had 3 children that came with him. We don't know their names. But we do know that they were carrying 1 trunk and some number of bags of bedding. The number isn't there. By 1846, we see a little more information. This is the Brigg Nautilus arriving in New Orleans in 1846. There is no cargo listed on this, but this is the entire passenger list. There are only 7 things listed. We have a man named Gaultier, no first name listed, but he is 36 years old. He's a clergyman from France, and he is intending to settle in the United States. Now there's a column over on the right side of the page that says number that have died on the voyage. And when you start seeing columns with questions like that, you know that the government is trying to track something. And in this case, they're trying to track how many people died on the voyage. And we see that 1 person died, and he's listed down here. Matthew, again, I don't know if this is his first name or his last name, but he died during the passage. And this is 1886, the Nova Scotian arriving in Baltimore. And this is a longer manifest. This is actually page 6 of a 6-page manifest. So you can see with these numbers down here, there were 221 passengers. And in this case, we get the individual's name, their age, their sex, their occupation, the country they're coming from, state or town to which they're going, and again, it asks if anybody died on the voyage, and it also asks what section of the ship they were in. And these people were divided into female steerage and male steerage. This entire ship seemed to be in steerage. So we see here Mary Callahan. She was 17 years old. She was a domestic servant from Ireland, and she was going to Chicago, Illinois. And now I mentioned, again, we had the question, did anybody die on the voyage? Down here we have Maria and Pete Howson or Polson. It actually says Howson or Polson. Since this information was taken down orally, it's very possible that the person providing the information had an accent and the person taking it down just couldn't understand if it was Howson or Polson. So they wrote both. They were both born at sea on August 10th, and on August 12th, Maria died, and Pete died on August 17th. So they were less than a week old, and they both died.
Now we've looked at what we can find on the earlier passenger manifests. On the later passenger manifests, you're going to get more information. With these records, you can get the name of the individual, names of any traveling companions, the age and personal description of each person traveling, their occupation, their last residence, the name and address of relatives they are going to join, whether they can read or write, the amount of money they are carrying, and you can also find out whether or not they were a polygamist or an anarchist. This is an example of a passenger list for the SS Majestic, which arrived into the Port of New York on March 27, 1923. As you can see, this manifest is nicely typed. A lot of the manifests will not be and are very difficult to read. But you'll also notice that at the top of this list, it is called the list of United States citizens. And sometimes you will see that the lists will be separate. So sometimes you'll have a list of aliens, sometimes you'll have a list of citizens, sometimes they'll be mingled in together. On this particular list, you have the names of each passenger along with their age, their sex, their marital status, where they were living. You also have a column that's filled in with a bunch of handwritten notations. These are going to be the passport numbers for each of these individuals. So it could lead you to another source of information that we have at the National Archives. If you look towards the bottom of the list, you'll see Seth Van Slars. He's 21 years old. He is a male. He is married. He has passport number 241469, and his address is listed as T.C. & Son, New York. And upon further investigation, it seems that T.C. Son in New York is actually the name of a travel agency.
Thomas Cook and Son.
This passenger list here is for the SS Rotterdam, which arrived into New York City on August 17, 1921. This one, instead of being a list of U.S. citizens, it's actually a list of aliens, and it tells you that at the very top of the page. And it gives you a whole lot of information about the passengers. Not only do you have page 1, but you're going to have a second page to this manifest, which will give you even more information about each passenger. One of the people on board this ship is Jacob Berger. He's 25 years old. He is married. He is a butcher. He can read and he can write. He was born in Rotterdam, and his last permanent residence is in New Jersey. It also gives you the address of his father, who still lives in Rotterdam. Tells you that his final destination is back to New Jersey. He paid his passage by workaway, which means that he worked on board the ship in order to pay his passage. He is carrying $25. It gives you the name of his wife, Mrs. Berger, and her address in New Jersey. And it also gives you a personal description of Jacob Berger. So from the manifest, we learn that he is 5'5" with blue eyes. And we also learn that unfortunately, he is not a polygamist or an anarchist. So you can see that the later immigration list will give you a wide source and a wide variety of different information.
I want to point out two things about this list. One, Rebecca says, unfortunately, he is not a polygamist or an anarchist because no one ever says yes. They wouldn't be allowed into the country if they admitted to that. But if you ever find one that says says yes, they are a polygamist or an anarchist, please let us know, because we've been looking for these. And the second thing I want to point out is we were giving this lecture at one of our genealogy fairs, and a gentleman in the front row recognized this family, and Mrs. Berger's name is apparently Edna, according to this researcher. I have no way to verify this, but he told us that.
Moving on. Now we have the passenger manifest of the SS New Amsterdam, which arrived into New York on June 11, 1953. Because this is one of the later manifests, you'll notice that it does not give as much information about the individuals as the earlier manifests do. On this manifest, you have John and Augusta Alexander. John was born in New York. Augusta was born in Germany. And you find the amount of luggage that they're traveling with. They have 5 suitcases, 1 trunk, 1 box, and 2 packages. Now, one of the things that you want to take note on this manifest is that under the passport number, they both have the same number. So it's quite possible that they are a married couple, even though it does not specify this on the manifest.
Now I want to talk about availability of these records. All of the examples we just showed you are available on microfilm at the National Archives building and at some of our regional facilities. Their holdings will vary. So it's a good idea to check ahead before you visit. Most of these records have been digitized and are available on Ancestry.com, and we provide access at all of our facilities free of charge. Some of the records, the New York records for 1892 to 1924, are available at ellisisland.org. And castlegarden.org has a searchable database but no images of the New York arrival records between 1820 and 1913. And of course, you can always submit a mail order request, and you can download a mail order form at www.archives.gov. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us. Our general email is inquire@nara.gov.
My name is Connie Potter, and I'm with the National Archives and Records Administration, and I'll be talking about census records. I'm going to give a brief introduction, then talk about the census records from 1790 until 1870, and then census records from 1880 until 1930. When working with census records, it's important to remember a few things. One, this is oral history. No one had to provide information to verify that what they said was correct, and because it's oral information, frequently people mispronounce names, people didn't spell the names correctly. Also, the census takers could have very bad handwriting, so you can't always read the handwriting. You don't always know who provided the information. And so the information may be inaccurate because a neighbor or a family member that wasn't as familiar with everyone in the family might have provided the information. Also, the census reflects what happened the previous 10 years, and we'll see some examples of that as I go through the questions. And finally, not everyone was counted. Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution provides for taking the census, and the Constitution reads, "Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for the term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years of the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall direct by law." So the first census was taken in August of 1790, and it's been taken every 10 years since then. The census is closed for 72 years after it is taken, and they are arranged by census year, state, then county, and beginning in 1880 enumeration district. And we generally recommend that you start with the most recent census and work backwards, although I'm going to start with the first census and move forwards. Census records from 1790 until 1840 generally list just the head of the household, and they give statistical information on everyone else in the household. Now, the head of the household can include a man, a woman, or an African American if they are free and the head of the household. This example from the 1790 census shows, one, the condition that some of the records were when we received them, and the person on the second line is Samuel Adams. The person on the first line is John Hancock. Samuel Adams he was one white free male, age 16 and older, and in his household was another free white male under 16. There were 3 free white females. There were no other people, and he held no slaves. This census took 9 months to take. Later on, it was either 2 weeks or 2 months, depending on whether the area counted was in the city or in the country. And from 1790 until 1820, the marshals who took the census used whatever piece of paper they had on hand. There were no printed forms. So using the early censuses can be a little difficult because you sometimes need to go back to the first page to figure out what the questions are. And if your ancestor's on the fourth page, you don't necessarily know what the questions are until you go back to the top of the page. In 1830, they finally printed the census schedules, but it was still a statistical summary. On line 4 is Samuel Yoder, and there are 2 males between 10 and 15, 1 between 15 and under 20, and 1 male 30 and under 40. There's 1 female under 5, and then 1 female in each of the categories 5 and under 10, 15 and under 20, 20 and under 30. So to use the records, you need to know the ages of the people in the family, but what you can also look at are the other people in the neighborhood to see if there are other families that might have been related. So you want to read the entire census page in these early censuses, or if not, the entire township or county. You can see this is a 2-page schedule, and it says at the top, by the marshal and the district from which it was taken. Beginning in 1850, they list everyone in the household, but they don't give you their relationship. But it lists the men, the women, the children, servants, and sometimes you can tell a little bit of the relationship by the occupation. For example, it might list that somebody was a servant. In 1850 and 1860, there are separate free and slave schedules. This is the 1870 census for Prescott, Arizona, and you get the name of the person, their age, sex, and race, their occupation, and where they were born. The final question reflects what on the previous decade. This is the 1870 census, and it refers back to the Civil War. And in the last column, it asks if you are a male 21 years of age or over, and have you been denied the right to vote on other than a crime or the late rebellion. This is referring to the men who received the right to vote under the 15th Amendment, where you could vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Women could not vote, so this refers to the black men who were slaves who were freed under the 15th Amendment after the Civil War. This is a slave schedule for Maryland in 1850. The slave schedules rarely give the name of the slave. It usually gives the name of the slave owner or the person who was working with the slave. Now this one isn't particularly difficult if you knew your family, for example, your family member had been owned by by Mrs. Pierce. There are only 4 slaves listed. But on some of the slave schedules that can go on for page and page and page, Jefferson Davis in Mississippi has many pages of slaves, and it would be almost impossible to determine using these records if your ancestor was a slave for Jefferson Davis. Beginning in 1880, they list the relationship to the head of the household. It also, starting in 1900, provides citizenship information, the year of immigration, naturalization status, whether naturalized, NA, whether they filed their first papers, PA, or they were an alien, AL. And in 1920, it gives the year of naturalization. The records are also arranged by enumeration districts, and those are areas within the county that an enumerator could cover in either 2 weeks or 1 month, depending on whether they're in the city or the country. This, also in 1880, for the first time, it lists, in cities only, the name of the street and the house number, so you can get the address beginning in 1880. 1880 census, for the first and only time, asks health questions. And was the person blind, they use phrases that we might not use now, but they ask if you're deaf and dumb, an idiot, insane, maimed, crippled, or disabled. And some of the examples they use, not examples, but some of the diseases they put down may not be familiar to you, but just get on the internet and search for a medical dictionary, and you can frequently get the answer that way. On line 15, you'll see Andrew Davis is a white male, age 70. He's a ship carpenter, born in Maine, and his father and mother are both born in Maine. So you know, at least for that time, you don't need to look at immigration records. The other people in the household are Mary, a daughter, 41, a teacher, and Lucinda, also a sister, keeps house. The 1890 census was destroyed as a result of a fire in the Department of Commerce, but part of the 1890 veteran census survives. It's important to remember that the 1890 census was done by the Bureau of the Census. This census was done by the VA, was done by the census under the direction of the VA. The states from Alabama through Kansas are missing. We just have Kentucky through Wyoming, but fortunately Washington, D.C. is listed under Washington, D.C. and not District of Columbia. And this will give the name of the soldier, what unit he was in, what his health problems were. Now the census is surviving soldiers, sailors, Marines, and widows of the Union. However, fortunately, people don't always follow directions, so you can find information as far back as the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War and Confederate soldiers. This is the 1930 census, the most recent census that's available. This one gives you, for the first time, how much do you pay rent, monthly rent for your house, or did you buy your house? If so, for how much? Do you have a radio? It gives the place of birth of not only the person, but the father and the mother, and this started in 1880. It also asks if you're a veteran of any wars, and they ask that frequently on the census records, so that they know how many. It gives you an idea of what they're going to have to pay in pensions. And in 1930, they give both the occupation and the industry. And President Hoover, his occupation is President of the United States, but his industry is federal employee. These records are available on microfilm at the National Archives building in Washington, D.C., and in some of the regional facilities, but you need to check with each facility to see what they have, if it's on site, how you can get a hold of it. They're online at Ancestry.com, Footnote, which is a partial list, Heritage Quest, and these are available at National Archives facilities free of charge, although they are subscription-based online services. And mail order for a fee, and you can get information at order online at www.archives.gov.